Hey everyone, it's Sam the Reclaimer developer, and I wanted to make a video today kind of talking about the use of AI tools and, kind of like my thoughts on using them and where I think things are going. Um, so, there's been a lot of buzz in the tech community regarding the use of tools like ChatGPT and Midjourney. And I think things have been looking a little bit bleak in terms of the directions that big tech companies are pushing to replace a lot of their staff with these tools, which I think is a massive mistake because, first of all, there's never going to be a tool that can replace human intuition. Actually, engineering and problem solving, critical thinking, and common sense, these are things that tools just simply can't replace. Um, and I know like companies like Microsoft have invested like billions of dollars in research and like into I think Chat GPT or some other tool I can't remember. Like it's obvious what companies want to do, what they where their hearts are in terms of the things they want to accomplish. And I think these tech companies are making a very big mistake when it comes to just how much they're investing in these tools, thinking that they're going to replace people. Um, you can only do that so much before things become absolutely, unmanageable. Uh, Sort of like one of my motivations for doing this project, the Reclaimer, is sort of going back to an old school way of doing things. And I'm not advocating that everybody do that. Like, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine last night, kind of going over like why I'm never going to partner with a big name company like Microsoft. I don't care, you know, what they have to offer because like it's one of my lines in the sand is to not work with a big game publisher because I don't want their really bad practices being worked into this project. Um, and but if it's your goal to create a game, do it however you want to do that. If it's using Unreal, Unity, Midjourney, ChatGPT, uh, Python, Scratch, it doesn't matter. And I've mentioned this on stream, and it was kind of a joke because my wife was like, "What would it take to code an entire game in Python?" And she asked me that on stream, and I thought it was someone else because she codes in Python. But and I was like, it's whatever allows you to accomplish your goals and gets you learning and makes you feel accomplished. And for me, that's sort of using this very minimal style of doing things like in the days before licensed engines and these massive, you know, partnerships with tech companies that have lost their way. So the way I see things is AI is just a tool. It's a tool that I would use like my editor, my compiler, my source control, my debugger. It's just a tool that can help me do other tasks but I am the thing that's doing the problem solving. And one thing I learned from engineering school is the ability to recognize problems and like know what type of problem you're working with can in most cases be more important than actually coming to the right conclusion, because if you don't even recognize what problem space you're working in, and this is I've noticed this really is really prevalent in like solving problems in like 3D space. Like, is it, what type of transform am I working with? Am I like rotating along this axis or that axis? Like, is it a scaling problem or, it's just like whatever problem you're working with, being able to look at something and know what you're looking at is more valuable than actually coming to the right conclusion, because if you recognize the problem, you can eventually work your way to the most optimal solution. And if you recognize the problem AI is one of those tools that can sort of help you visualize potential solutions to a problem. And I'm gonna start with Midjourney. And for those that don't know, the Midjourney is this AI that can create astonishing photos using prompts that you supply it through a Discord channel. And where I see it being useful is like people like myself who have zero artistic expression. It's not going to be able to deliver a final product that I would use in a game or use as like a modeling template. Instead, what I see it as like a communication tool between me and an actual artist, an actual flesh and blood artist. Instead of me having to describe what I want, I can just feed stuff into Midjourney and have it spit out a bunch of things that's like, this is the vibe that I'm going for it. I'll give you an example here. So you've probably seen this before on my channel. It used to be my old YouTube profile picture. But this is just a quick and dirty sketch I threw together in Photoshop using some reference images that I vectorized. And this is of like the head of Adam, the main character. So it's like you can see he has like an army helmet, like some things over his ears and a gas mask, and behind the mask is like these lenses with like, you know, this red lens flare. And it's just like implying there's something behind that mask and he's, you know, part machine. I mean, it gets the point across, but it's very quick and dirty, and it's just like something I threw together in Photoshop. Like, this is kind of the vibe I'm going for. Well, I started feeding this into Midjourney, like giving it prompts, showing it the template photo, and this is what it started to spit out. And I was just absolutely blown away by this tool's ability to just generate a photo like this. I mean, like, look at, like, he's got his army garb, he's got like a gas mask and the red behind the eyes. I could not get the tool to like, hey, could you reimagine this same thing but like lower the glasses? And it started doing things like putting an extra pair of glasses like over his eyes, and he has like 2 pair of goggles and stuff like that. But it's like he's got, you know, it looks like a hat, but, you know, you can see that he's got something on his head. And I'll go to it. This one was by far my favorite because I like the implication of like the breathing tubes and stuff like that. And he has a little bit more emotion. Like, he looks just like a plain robot in this one, but in this, it's like, you know, there's actually something behind the mask. And, you know, it sort of captures that air of like horror and like sadness in like one picture. This one was like, you know, I told it to like, imagine he's a soldier, but he's like a cyborg skeleton looking thing. And, you know, you can see he has hair up here. He has like human ears, like right there. But the skull with like the breathing apparatus and everything, like it's hitting the nail like on the head, not all at once, but like across different photos, like what he would look like just kind of all together, and what he would look like, you know, under the mask. Like, I want him to look really off-putting, but not like blatantly evil, you know. And this one is one that was created by supplying it that initial image at the beginning right here. And after a few iterations, this is what it spat out, like what he would look like all together. And what I really like is the eyes behind the goggles. Now, as you can see, there's not one that nails it all together completely. But across these different photos, an artist could look at this and say, okay, I know exactly what vibe you're going for. And an example of that would be this quick and dirty sketch right here that was done by a friend of mine who I had over my house. He's a friend from high school. And if you're watching this, Zach, you're a man of your craft. and your works of art are just absolutely mind-blowing. And this was just a quick and dirty sketch. I was like, showing him my setup. Like, I've got a studio tablet, and I opened Photoshop, and I was like, hey, do you want to like try it out and see, do you like the feel of the tablet? And he just threw together a sketch, and it was something he was able to do. And like, this over here is just like a quick and dirty sketch of Batman, but like, you've got the skull with like the eyes and the teeth and like parts of the breathing apparatus and his suit right here. It's a very quick and dirty sketch. It's not something that I would use to like model, but my friend was able to get the idea of what I was going for by just sort of looking at these sketches. They are not replacements for an artist, but it's sort of like an intermediary between like person who has an idea and someone who can help implement that idea. It's just sort of this extra step in between that helps communicate, if that makes sense. Where it's like, this is the overall vibe I'm going for. And then someone can take that and start, filling in the gaps and putting it all together. So that's where I see tools like Midjourney being useful. Is like, it helps me articulate the look and feel that I'm going for. And then there's Chat GPT, and everybody, there's like videos popping up like how to incorporate GPT into your workflow, and I'm sure there's going to be like Visual Studio Code plugins for it and like all these other types of things. I'm going to show you why this is not a direct replacement for programmers who are able to recognize what they're looking for, rather. And I'm actually going to jump into the code really quick, and I'm going to show you sort of like a quick example of what I'm talking about. So I'm going to turn this on, and we'll go ahead and build this as soon as it gets up to speed. But so I've got this method here that's it's a very simple, naive matrix multiplication function. It's very straightforward. It takes in matrix A and B, and it returns matrix C, which is a multiplication result of matrices A and B. It's fairly simple. It's a somewhat of a naive approach, like, in my opinion, because it's like, there's ways of doing this without loops. This is like the quick and dirty way that has been done in the Reclaimer since day one, and I was curious how ChatGPT could help me optimize this. And just to show, like, here's the status of the Reclaimer here. I'll get into more details later, but I just wanted to have a method that could, or just have a more optimized version of this. And so with that, let's go ahead and take a look at what ChatGPT was able to spit out. So I asked it, I fed it my function. And one thing that I've been wanting to implement at some point is SIMD, which stands for Single Instruction Multiple Data. It's going to be a way of like doing multiple operations with the same instruction and cutting down on the number of cycles needed to do a transform, because there's tons of transformations that are being done every single frame, and that time counts. And I want the footprint to be as low as possible to fit as many transforms as I can into one frame. So I said, hey, can you rewrite this using SIMD? And it was like, sure. So, and it briefly explained what SIMD was, and it rewrote it using the loops and just sort of doing this very simple transform that uses SIMD. And so I asked it to use SIMD. I didn't ask it to make it faster, but now I'm like, would it be faster to leave loops out, right? Just do everything directly. And so it said, no, it's not possible. You can't leave the loops out of this function. Well, let's kind of go back a little bit. So looking at this function, you can assume just by reading it that these are 4 by 4 matrices. One, they're square matrices, meaning they have the same number of rows in their columns and they're both the same size, which means doing this without loops is trivial. It would be annoying. You have to code like every single operation, and you would basically be hoisting this out of the loop and just doing it all by hand. It's annoying, but you can do it. But chat said, no, you can't do it. And it started going into this thing about how like you can't do that because you don't know what you're working with. But I was like, you totally can. Let's assume you know that they will always be 4 by 4. Can you eliminate them? And it's like, okay, with that assumption, you sure can. And now we're going to rewrite the function that eliminates the loops and uses direct indexing. Do you notice something in there? Like, did it even, like, it, I think it eliminated one of the 4 loops, because, like, if you look there, there's 3 of them. But it was like, let's do it without the loops. Well, there's still a couple of 4 loops in there. It's better, but there's still loops in there. And I'm like, hang on, there's still loops in that function. And it's like, okay, you're correct. I apologize, and we are going to be optimizing it for the innermost loop. And it went backwards and reintroduced another loop. So you can tell it's struggling with something very basic. Like, it gave me sort of a templated answer that was like, you know, I could extrapolate this and make something that, you know, I could do the rest myself, you know, and I think most people could if they could see like, oh, okay, these are the operations I need to use. Chat is struggling, but I can do the rest myself. But I really wanted it to get this right. And I'm calling it out, and I'm just like, look, you're solving for a general case. Solve for the specific one, assuming that this is the struct. And like, this is how I've defined a mat4 in the reclaimer. It's a 4 by 4 matrix. It's 2-dimensional array. Each like array is 4 elements wide. Like, it's very, very specific. There's no assumptions that need to be made whatsoever. You can solve for the specific case that is always going to happen every time that this function is called. It's like, now you can rewrite it using direct indexing and SIMD without loops. Okay, now it gets it. It's like I had to like guide it along and hold its hand a little bit. And it was like, okay, great. It finally gets it. Well done. So now I wanted to know, like, how many cycles did we save on that? And like, just ballpark. You don't have to be perfect, but just like give me a general estimate. And it's like, well, it really depends on the CPU architecture. And so the CPU on this machine is an AMD Ryzen 5 3600. It's not top of the line, but it's not a pushover either. It's like, let's assume this architecture. Can we get an estimation on that cycle count? Now, this is something that you could probably do yourself by like just Googling the processor, looking up the architecture and the instructions that are involved. It would be trivial to do, but it's like, you know, save me a little bit of time and just kind of do this calculation for me. I see this as being kind of like Google mixed with Wolfram Alpha, if that makes sense. Like, it's able to look things up and do these sort of base calculations and stuff like that. And it was like, assuming it's cache friendly, like your original function was like 1,000 cycles, and now it's been reduced from 50 to 100, assuming it's cache friendly. And I'm like, okay, can you give me an example of what that function would look like if it's cache friendly? Now, I think there's a few assumptions it's making here, like if it's row major versus column major. But it's like, let's look at this that takes advantage of cache-friendly storage. And I think the idea is that it transposes the matrix so that that like an entire either like row or column can fit into a single cache line. And I do apologize. It's not something that I know off the top of my head. Like I think the reclaimer is row major. Like it's the opposite of whatever the default like OpenGL like thing is. And I need to look at that to know exactly what it is I'm dealing with. But it got cut off, and I'm like, I'm sorry you didn't finish. But it's like, yeah, transposing the matrix improves cache locality by arranging its elements in a more cache-friendly way. Excuse me. And you transpose it, you perform the multiplication, and then once it's computed, you transpose it back. And I'm like, okay, that's a great response. The theory checks out, the code checks out, at least by looking at it. And that was the end of our conversation. So I fast forward to like, okay, let's try this. This is the original, and this is what Chat GPT spat out. Now, it's not, I left out that like transform, but I wanted to just throw this together based on what Chat GPT put together, and we're going to see what happens. And so there's all these things put together, and I'm just blindly putting this together based on what Chat GPT said, and let's see what happens. Ooh, not quite. Like, it's obvious that some things are broken. Like, it's like everything is like squished down and not really working correctly. Like if I switch to a different perspective, like things are just absolutely broken. So I will be able to debug this and figure out like, you know, what were you trying to accomplish? It gave me a general direction to go in, but this is going to require a little bit more programmer intuition to get working correctly. And so what's the point of me going through all this? It just goes to show that these things are tools, you know. These tools are never going to replace artists. They're never going to replace programmers. And if companies try to do that, they're going to put themselves on a trajectory where things become absolutely unmanageable. And I see, like, everybody wants to talk about, like, or like, you know, doomsayers will talk about like an AI apocalypse. I see the consequences of AI going quote unquote rogue is just like, you count on them so much that whenever they make mistakes, it's like, you know, potentially bad things could happen. It's like, if this was an absolutely critical operation that I was doing under a time crunch, I had to get this right, and I just blindly did this, you know, I would be introducing some really bad things to the code, and, you know, it makes it worse for somebody else who actually has to debug it. And, but I was able to recognize, like, what the problem is, and then just to sort of go down that path of figuring out what to do. And we're just going to go through a really simple example of, like, you know, one thing I've been working on this sprint is working with quaternions, because I use, like, Euler angles, which is, like, rotating everything by, like, rotate it by pitch, then rotate it by yaw, then rotate it by roll, and stuff like that. And I wanted to do it with quaternions to sort of just do that in one go and do it in such a way that it's immune to gimbal lock. And let me go ahead and log into ChatGPT really quick, and we will, like in that example of the reclaimer you saw, it's already using quaternions. I did not use chat to do that, but I am curious what it's going to spit out. So let's start a new chat. Or I think I just sent it here. So I'm just going to say using this function declaration, implement logic to, like in C, to perform a quaternion rotation, or a 3D rotation transform using quaternions. Sorry, I just can't type today. But it would be something like it's static, or we don't even need to include that. We'll just say assume mat4 is a 4x4 matrix. That is the return transform. We're going to say mat4, and it's going to be do rotation, and it takes in F32 pitch radians. Let's kind of help it along and not substitute types, but it's going to be float pitch radians, float pitch, or float yaw radians, and float roll radians. Okay, so let's see what it spits out, and we will compare it to like what's actually in the reclaimer. So here we go. Yep, that's a quaternion, and yes, mat4 is a 4x4 matrix. And let's see. So far, it's looking dead on. So it's caching the sine and cosine transforms, which is exactly what you want to do. I've seen some examples where people plug in just the actual calls to these trig functions in the matrix, and you don't want to do that because these are very expensive operations to do, and you want to cache them where you can, so you don't have to call them more than you absolutely have to. So far, it's hitting the nail right on the head, just based on what I've seen of my own. And so it got this last one correct. Like, it's assuming that the identity matrix is also plugged into it. It got cut off here, but like, so I would be like, hey, you didn't finish that, but we don't need to do that. We can obviously see what it was going for. So let's go ahead and pull up, I think it's quaternion H, no. Let's see, quaternion, yeah, math quaternion, and here we go. So my function takes in the pitch, yaw, and roll, and so let's see what it spat out. Okay, close that. And so we have so I'm just kind of doing these operations, and so far, that's exactly what it's doing, and it's caching those, like I said, so you don't have to repeat yourself. And just by looking at it, just at a glance, this is really close. I think it's actually hitting the nail right on the head, actually. And I'll have to find where... Okay, so quaternion to rotation. So it takes the quaternion, and it's doing this. Yeah, it hit the nail right on the head. But if I didn't know... Like, let's say, for example, I wasn't able to recognize that, you know, what a quaternion is, or what a transform matrix was, or what an identity matrix was. It's like, would you know exactly what you're looking at and be able to, like, guide this thing along? So, knowing, like, I think there's a quote that's like, knowing is half the battle, and I would say, like, knowing is the majority of the battle. like in engineering calculus, when we had our exams, getting the right answer was oftentimes the lowest point value. Like the actual answer itself. I mean, if you were drastically wrong, yeah, it would be more points off. But it's like they wanted you to show your thought process and recognize what problem it is that you were working with. And you could have like accidentally fudged something at the last minute and gotten the wrong answer, and that would just be like -1 point out of 10 because you were able to recognize what it was that you were looking at. There's fundamental things that you're just not going to get away from in engineering. And where this is a useful tool is it also, would you understand why you would want to do something like this, right? Because like, someone like the example I originally saw was in Python, and they were just coding, cosine and sine and plugging and chugging straight into these operations right here, which is extremely slow compared to just caching the results outright. So I don't see these being a viable replacement for people at all. Respect programmers, respect artists, pay them what they're worth. And that doesn't mean that companies aren't going to try to push things in this direction. And it's for these reasons that I've listed. These companies need to be fought on their decisions to replace people with these tools. They're really neat. Here's the deal. I think these works of art, my mind was absolutely blown by, a program's ability to do something like this. But it's not a replacement for someone who's actually going to be feeling what needs to be felt while creating these things. And again, it's not a complete picture. There's parts of it, like the skull, that are really cool. And then there's the one over here where I really thought the breathing tubes and everything were really cool, but I wanted to see what was behind the mask. It's not going to be a replacement, even though companies may be pushing in that direction. That's just my thoughts on everything. I know this was a bit long-winded, but I appreciate everybody sticking around, and I'll be doing a live stream, I think probably tomorrow, actually. And I appreciate everybody sticking around, and I'll hope to see some of you at the live stream tomorrow, and I'll see you later.